All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get the program started on time because we have a lot to talk about in the next 90 minutes. I'm Heather Green-Kirk, a tax partner at Citrin Cooperman, and I am so grateful that you're all able to join us for our 9th annual Driving Your Business Women at the Wheel event. We are virtual today, which is great because we have got colleagues and clients and friends of Citrin Cooperman joining us from across the US. So we welcome everyone and thank you for sharing part of your day with us. Citrin Cooperman has always prioritized the progression of women and minorities at our firm, with committees and programs in each of our offices focused on gender equality and empowering diversity. We have made a lot of progress. The pandemic has created hurdles, particularly for caregivers, that have further widened economic and racial disparities. Citrin, like many firms, has recognized that the pandemic, school and daycare closings, along with remote work itself, has set off countless of professional identity crises. Changing careers, starting over, finding something more fulfilling. This is not a new concept. However, it has been pushed into the limelight as a result of the monumental reassessments many of us are facing as a result of this pandemic. Today, we're pleased to present 3 women with very different stories of transformation that took place well before COVID-19 changed us all. Their stories, however, are relatable to anyone who is facing an unexpected change in their journey. We hope that their stories and what they learned along the way can help you on your own path of transformation. Today's panel will be led by Chelsea Rosen, an audit partner at Citrin Cooperman. Chelsea has been moderating Women at the Wheel for several years now. She uses her strong voice to guide others and finds ways to connect those that need mentorship. And it is an honor to be able to have shared this platform with her for so many years now. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of our panelists and why we've invited them to be with us here today. First, we have Laura Rotter. Laura is a certified financial advisor and planner and is the owner of True Abundance Advisors. After many successful years managing money for institutional investors, Laura was faced with the question of whether she was fulfilling her life's purpose. With a family and everything money could buy, Laura felt as though something was missing. Not quite sure what that something was, Laura began to study mindfulness practices. She worked to bridge her technical abilities to help people achieve financial security with her desire to find satisfaction beyond what money could buy in her life and the lives of others. She now works with other professionals in various stages of transformation to help them find both the security and purpose they're looking for. Also on our panel today is Helen Nicken. Helen and her husband Bradley began investing in real estate in the early 1980s. While her company, HB Nicken, was growing, she decided to take a step back to raise her children while her husband continued to run the company. All was going well. Her children were happy and thriving. Business was booming despite the ups and downs in the real estate market. Then, in 2009, Bradley passed away. Helen was faced with the monumental task of choosing a path. Does she let someone else take over the business? Does she come back to the company to carry on her husband's legacy? How will she transition back from full-time mom to chairwoman of the board if she does go back? How is she going to gain the respect and trust of those who were used to dealing with Bradley? Her journey is one of triumph over tragedy, and I am honored she's here to share her story with you today. Last but certainly not least, you will hear from Valerie Cooper. Founder of Picture That, a fine art consulting firm, you would never guess how she got to where she is today. With an MBA from Columbia, Valerie spent 15 years at Goldman Sachs as Vice President of Risk Technology. She led software development teams across the world. While this is impressive in itself, to be a Black woman in technology back in the early 1990s, Valerie was a standout. She was approached by her firm to take on a diversity role. While her head screamed, "No way," her heart looked around and saw that not only did she not work with any other Black people, even working with other women in her field was hard to find. She had to say yes. Her firm needed her and society needed her. How would she rebrand and pivot from technology guru to diversity specialist? Her journey is one filled with passion and shows what can happen when preparation meets opportunity. I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea, Laura, Helen, and Valerie to get the discussion started. If you have any questions throughout today's event, please feel free to use the Q&A and send them our way. Chelsea, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Heather, it's always a pleasure moderating this event with you. So looking forward to another year to add to our list. All right, to kick off today, I'd like, Laura, for you to start and to share a little bit more, beyond what Heather discussed, to talk about, your transition and, making your choice to leave an industry that you had been a part of for a long time and kind of taking that leap of faith to make a hard choice to find a new direction.
It would be my pleasure. And I just want to say how happy I am to be here during this period of great resignation, as Heather pointed out, that's going on for all of us and specifically for women. So I'm excited to share my story and be part of this panel, and just wish I could see all of you. So I had a close to 30-year career on Wall Street. I always like to start with a little joke that I was 12 years old when I started. And as I reflect on that career, I really see it in thirds. So the first 10 years of my career were amazing. I was sort of this nerdy kid in elementary school and high school, even a bit in college. And then I found a field that was intellectually challenging. I was an analyst. I was good at it. I was rewarded for it financially. It was a really interesting work. I started in the mid-'80s. And similar to how I chose to be an English Lit major in college, I chose that because when you read novels, you're aware of what's going on economically in the background. You understand politically how that affects, how that is the backdrop of the story. Well, as an analyst, I never specialized in a particular industry. I was what was known as a generalist. So I was always learning something new about a new industry, what was impacting it, what was going on in the environment that would make it a good or a bad investment. It was really fascinating work, and I loved it. And frankly, it was how I started to define myself. I mean, in Wall Street, for better or for worse, you can see how much you're earning, and you can use that to judge whether or not you're successful. And so my identity was resting upon how I was doing as an analyst and as an investor. The second 10 years of my career, I was raising a family. For both financial reasons and characterologic reasons, I was the primary breadwinner, not the primary caretaker. But I did have 3 young children under the age of 3, which is a topic for whole other discussion.
Sorry about that. I think that's Helen's phone.
Yeah. Is there any way to turn it off? There we go. So nice little interlude there as I go into
Takes you back to days of having 3 children under 3. Crazy.
Exactly. So it was a busy household. I really don't remember reflecting on what I did. I just took it for granted. I'm the one who earns the money, and then I come home and I'm helping to raise our family. The last 10 years of my time on Wall Street, which is like early 2000 through 2013, I was miserable. The industry had changed from the nerds in high school that found intellectually challenging work that paid well to, as a generalization, the frat boys in college that said, oh, I can leverage my network and make a lot of money. It became all about making money. And the backdrop had changed. As interest rates came down, it got harder and harder to find investments that you were actually being compensated for taking the risk. Everybody was chasing the same investment ideas. And I didn't share the values of the people I work with. The last 3 years, I was working for a hedge fund group within Citi. And I was meditating on the train as I went in the morning. I had a happy light on my desk because we were in a bubble within a larger trading floor, but where I sat had absolutely no windows. And as Heather pointed out, I had started to meditate. I had started to practice yoga. And these mindfulness practices suddenly made me aware that I was a victim of my life and I wasn't going to get a do-over. Like, this was it. I wasn't going to get another chance. On the other hand, I had what I heard referred to recently as golden handcuffs. I mean, I had put a very pricey household infrastructure in place, a 6,000 square foot home on an acre of land and a vacation home and 3 kids in private school and camp. And I really felt like I couldn't walk away. And then I had what I look back on as a spiritual experience. I had done a one-day private silent meditation retreat, and I still have the journal entry from the next day where I wrote, I'm not going to be a victim of my life. I'm going to call a meeting with the head of my group and, make recommendations about how the morning meeting should go, how we should make investment choices. I thought, let's try to be more engaged in this job that I'm doing every day. And instead, my boss called me into his office and said, we are laying off a lot of people in the group. This is not for cause. Here's a nice big fat severance package, and your services are no longer needed here. Now, on the one hand, what a great sense of relief. I couldn't bring myself to walk away. As a spiritual teacher I had said, you're not yet in enough pain. When you are, you'll leave. On the other hand, I remember that week sliding down the stairs accidentally at home and bursting into tears, and my husband saying, but I thought you're happy about this. I don't understand. And I said, my identity is gone. Who am I? I have to create it from scratch. I don't know what the next step is. And so I explored 3 different professions. I said, well, maybe I can become a yoga teacher. I had done a yoga teacher training while working, and I had taught friends in my basement in the evening. But I have very tight hamstrings, and I didn't think that was, my mission in life. I actually researched becoming a rabbi. I was always drawn. I have a very strong spiritual life. One of my favorite things about teaching yoga was the spiritual teaching or theme that I wove throughout the class. But everyone I spoke to loved being in school. Anyone who had become a rabbi in later years said, I like writing papers. I love being in class. Like, no, that's not for me. So I explored becoming a financial advisor for women. Financial advisor because, of course, I had deep fluency in financial concepts and financial markets. And women because I had spent 30 years on trading floors with dudes and came to realize how much I just loved being in the company of women and the sharing that takes place, especially if you're able to create a safe space for them. As I'm coming to the end of my story, I don't want to leave you with the idea that starting a business, I actually joined an existing firm in 2014 where I learned that I really did love financial planning and it really spoke to me and my skill set. But I left that firm in 2016 because I wanted to create something in my own image. I wanted to create True Abundance Advisors, specifically to work with mid-career professional women who are kicked out from or burnt out by their corporate jobs and who want to use their money to create meaning in the next stage of life. And I also wanted to be fee only. I charge a flat fee. I don't get paid for selling product. And that was very, very important to me. So as I sum up, I don't want to leave with the impression that starting a business is the end of a story because as an entrepreneur, I'm learning every day that starting a business is the beginning of a journey of self-exploration. I work with my clients around money stories. And when I first started, I was the worst boss I ever had. I was shooting all over myself. I was getting up the same time in the morning and getting through obligations and to-dos. And then I realized that my story was, if I'm not exhausted and constantly productive, then I'm not a serious professional. And so I practice changing that story. I give myself 8 hours of sleep every night. After I walk my dog, I meditate, journal, and exercise. So notice your stories, and are you defining success through somebody else's measure? And then another thing I would like to leave you with is, entrepreneurship is a series of peaks and valleys, or any transition you go through is not what I imagine as a kid. You climb a mountain and then you sit at the top and you're done. You're always going up and down. And so you need to find what motivates you and what your mission is to pull you forward. I learned I can't push myself to get things done. And again, shoulding. I need to be pulled, and we all need to be pulled by a true motivation and sense of mission, because building a business takes time. So I'm excited again to see how this panel evolves.
Well, one of the things that you brought up that resonated with me was, how you had this identity associated with your career. And it's something I think we normally relate a transition or a rebranding with people as having an identity crisis, where, I've been doing some more research about it being defined now, especially in this great resignation, as, thinking of it in a different frame of reference as being an identity foreclosure, in that we have a fixed mindset about work and ourself and how we relate to that. And, Michelle Obama had actually talked about asking your kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's one of the most useless things you can ask a child, because it really defines them that, one, when you grow up, it's over, and that you have defined yourself from that point when you start your career. And that we should think of work rather as what we do than who we are, and have more flexibility with change, because, just look at our environment about how much we've changed in our careers, whether you've, changed what you do. We've had to adjust and be flexible and be comfortable with that uncertainty. And I just loved how you explained how you had to, find what was meaningful for you, and that definition did not come from work. And I think that will speak volumes to many people, and appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned also about how, once you had moved on and left your career on Wall Street, that, you found some time to discover what you wanted to do and didn't take your first step into action. And I was wondering, what you had learned in that process about yourself, of, any roadblocks or hiccups that you wish you could have avoided, or great things that you found in self-discovery in going through that you could give, the audience a little more insight to.
Thank you for the question, Chelsea. What I have learned as I go through this journey is that I look at every hiccup as a learning opportunity. Not that I'm, you whitewash and you say, oh, that's wonderful. But it took me a lot. I was told when I went into this business that it would take a long time to build a practice. And I didn't quite recognize how long that would be. And during the pandemic, I actually had a number of, there aren't that many women in financial services in general, and this side of financial services, what's known as retail, or working with individuals in particular. And so I was approached by a number of firms who wanted a woman advisor to join. And I really did, I still remember the walk with my husband. My husband has always been the one that's more uptight about money and financial resources. And I thought, well, maybe I should leave my firm and join another one. I'll have a steady income, a salary. And he looked at me, I could still tear up thinking about this. And he said, this is the most creative you've ever been in your entire life. You're recreating a process. You're rediscovering people you love to work with. And why would you abandon that just, for certainty of income? And that was like a reframing. I always think of reframing that I really needed. That thank God, if you will, for these challenges, because it's giving me the opportunity to really think about how do I want to run this practice? What kind of questions do I want to ask my clients? What kind of journey do I want to take them on, as opposed to sort of going into a cookie cutter journey that already exists? So So I feel like to a certain extent, the slow growth that took place in the first couple of years has led me to this place of creativity and discovery.
I think culturally we're seeing, that redefinition of success, and it's not always that relentless drive for more, but rather, that internal definition of what gives you energy and energizes you and motivates you to move forward. So thank you so much for sharing all of your story.
My pleasure.
Helen, if I'd like to move on to you for you to give a little more explanation on, what you went through in the process of, stepping in as a leadership role in what was formerly your your husband's business, and, what that felt like to you. I think you're still on mute, Helen.
Hold on.
There, we can hear you now.
Okay. So I just want to clarify that my late husband, Bradley, and I started investing right after we got married. And we were buying co-ops and condominiums in New York City. And we did that, I'm going to go quickly, did that till about 1990. And then I had my first child in 1987 and my second one in 1991. And I started to step back from the business. My late husband was a real estate attorney. He wanted to do what his clients were doing. So we then moved to Connecticut and started buying commercial properties. But at that point, I had really stepped back from the business, but I was still involved. I would call as a sounding board. I was a partner still in all of our transactions. And, if we were going out to look at a property to buy, I would go along and, sort of put the seal of approval on. And just to make sure everybody knows, I own a commercial real estate company that's based in Greenwich, Connecticut. And also I want to thank Citrin Cooperman for including me because they are a very big part of my business as well. So we started buying commercial properties. He developed a firm which was made up of one of his first associates and then other people he hired along the way. And we were, doing business. I was raising a family, living in Greenwich, living a pretty nice life, I must say. And in 2006, he became ill, was diagnosed with cancer. And during the time that he was ill, we discussed, Helen, will you take over the business? Realize it takes a generation to sort of create a real estate business. We had a lot of assets, and we wanted to create this situation that if our children wanted to come into the business, it would be a foundation for their growth. So at that time, they were still in high school. And then when he passed away in 2019, they were 19 and 21 years old. So they weren't really ready to make a decision about what they wanted to do with their life. So, I remember sitting in our sunroom and having a conversation. I go, sure, I'll go back to business. I figured I'd go in a few hours a day, a few days a week. And he actually passed away in 2009, which was the beginning of the recession. And also between that time and right before he became ill, our firm was designated as the developer for a very large project in Hartford, Connecticut. And so we were committed to build retail, residential, and it was a public-private partnership with the state of Connecticut. So, about 2 weeks after he passed away, I came back to the firm. I let everybody know that we were going to carry on. And I think, and I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit before where I am today and then, but I can tell you that it was a very, very challenging time. I had 2 children that were still in college that needed a lot of attention and dealing with their own grief. I had people that had worked with my husband for years, and they had committed their livelihood to our business, and I felt a tremendous responsibility to them. And then I also felt that this was part of my late husband's legacy, and we wanted available for our children should they decide to go into the business. And I will say, I felt overwhelmed by the level of responsibility. It's, wasn't an easy time. And I also couldn't sell the business because we were in the midst of a recession. So basically, I said I would tackle this challenge. And there were times, as I said, I felt completely overwhelmed by the responsibility on all levels of my life. And I really had to think about how will I get through this? And I think Laura said it, life throws you, whether it's in your business or somebody else's business, a ton of responsibilities and obstacles. And the real question is, how do you get through those obstacles? It's not how do you cope with those obstacles, but how do you get through it? And I think I was very fortunate that I really relied on the people who were in my firm and learned from them as to how they dealt with issues. But I also sought out the help of outsiders because I needed that. And one of the things, and Mark Motel, who is my accountant and a member of Citrin Cooperman and probably knows my life and my business better than anybody, was a sounding board for me. And I joined outside organizations. I have a group of women from WPO, which is a Women's Presidents Organization, and they served as a sounding board for me, and another group that I'm involved with. So I think, and I will say also, like Laura said, it didn't happen overnight. I think anytime that you step into a new situation, first, I think it takes you about 4 or 5 years before you really begin to understand the total picture. And I also think it takes that amount of time just for one to begin. And for me, I'll talk about for me, to feel like I owned this business, that it was no longer, call it my husband's business. And it is still part of my husband's business because I feel very connected. But it really took me that amount of time to really begin like it was my business, and that these people who worked with my husband were now beginning to give me the respect that I had hoped I would be able to achieve. And again, they didn't sign up to have the wife as their boss. And I think there were a lot of challenges in just running a business. And, I was a sounding board, but I didn't understand the details of running this business, both from, one could say real estate is really a financial business and real estate is the product, because you're dealing with your lenders, you're dealing with your tenants, you're dealing with investors, and then you're dealing with market conditions. And one thing I think anybody who is planning on making a transition, there are a lot of things that you can control, but you can't control the market. Just like we had a recession in 2008, maybe till 2012, and we've just gone through COVID, and we're still in COVID. And as sort of smart or capable as I may be, it's not something that I can control. So you really have to think about how do you handle these issues that come up. And I think for me, one of the things that I have realized is, one, I could never do it alone. And secondly, I always think it's good to have people who you can call it soundboard with or problem solve with, because the more people you have, and sometimes the ideas that you don't even agree with, at some point, they may come to the point where you say, oh, that's really a great idea, and we'll go in that direction. And I also think, and one of the things that I also had to do, and I think anybody who's really starting a business has to do, whether it's for themselves or to create or develop a product, is you've got to go ask. And and in my case, I had to go ask for money because we had this project in Hartford, Connecticut, and I had to go out and raise money, which I had never done before. And again, if you have another type of product, you have to go ask somebody to support you, or you have to ask somebody to invest with you, or to, hire you as an advisor. So when I had to go do that, to be honest, I was scared. It did not come naturally to me. Maybe I'm an introvert extrovert, but the idea of sort of getting up the gear, and again, I'm in a woman and a man's business where most guys, maybe they'll sit on a golf course and say, I got a deal for you, and how much is it? And I'll invest. Where a woman, I think you have to go and sort of find a different path to enter. So I used to go and I would try to pre-visualize what I would want to accomplish, and have my notes and have my spiel so that I could tell them about the transaction. And for every maybe one yes, there were a lot of no's, but I had to also get comfortable with the idea of no's. And I think that one of the things that I listened to, also listening to other speakers, I spent time in Aspen in the summertime, and there was one speaker, the person who actually started Nest, who had left, I think they left Apple and started Nest, which is now owned by Google. But I remember them saying, you just have to be bold. And that sort of really stuck with me. And, you want to be bold, but not obnoxious. But if you don't ask, you don't get, and you just really have to lay out what you really want to accomplish. So I think that idea of sort of pre-visualization and with being bold at the same time. And I also go back to the idea that I think you really have to look at transition on a long-term basis. I've been doing this now. I took over in 2009, and it's now 13 years. And, one of the things in thinking about talking today is, it's very easy to sit and listen to people who have had success or accomplishments without without them sharing what the sort of, call it the challenges, the losses, the mistakes. And it hasn't been without that. And some of them, and I actually think I'm a very good decision maker. But, in our field, we have this project in Hartford, which is now complete, and it's almost 500,000 square feet. And I honestly could not have done it without everybody who works in my firm. And we've had issues with lenders that we've had to work with because of market changes. And the one thing is we have good relationships with lenders and they're willing to work with us. But that doesn't mean that it's not difficult to sit with the fact that you have a property that may not be performing. Changes in personnel that you have to make along the way. The person who started with my late husband was here 38 years and moved to Florida and made the decision that he wanted to live in Florida, and you can't be a president of a company with somebody living in Florida. So we made a transition. It was both a change, but also a very positive change in the business. So I think now, I will reiterate that I spent a lot of time anxious, feeling the weight of the responsibility, and always thinking, how can I make this work? And am I doing enough? Am I doing well enough? So I think I've gotten to the point where I can say, yes, I am. Nobody left my firm after my husband passed away. We are a very tight group of people. My son now works in the business and has been with me for 6 years. My daughter, who is also in real estate, works for a large development company and is doing quite well. We've made lots of transitions in the business. And I think that's the one thing, whatever business you think you may be starting, you have to take into consideration what's changing in the marketplace. We're sort of a mature business with a lot of older people, but you really have to adapt to what's taking place in the marketplace. And for us, that was really changing how we would structure our real estate deals and the type of properties that we would buy. I've raised funds for multiple acquisitions, which I'm thrilled about. It's gotten easier each time. We've upgraded systems within the firm. We've changed the nature of the properties that we buy. We started out only retail properties, but now we own medical, office, residential. And I think the other thing that I want to say is whenever you're making a decision to make a transition, you have to stay focused on the one thing that you think is really important. Because oftentimes over these last 13 years, there are a lot of ideas that come in and out. But I felt it was really important to stay focused on what we needed to do to get through this project in Hartford, and then to be able to expand after that. And I want to say that I want to end that I feel more confident now, and that the last 13 years has propelled me to where I am now. Again, with the questions of, do we have the capability? Am I doing what needs to be done? And I continue to reinvent myself and remember to be bold with humility. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell.
I think those are great messages to end off on. I think when, we thought of including you for this, it was, as an outward, you see the rebranding that you had to do coming in as more of a partner, a consultant in the company that you were a part of, and rebranding to your network, your staff, that you are now going to be put into a leadership role. But I think what you've also highlighted very eloquently is you also had to rebrand what that looked like to you personally, and that you could have stepped in, and feeling that imposter syndrome that we hear, many people talking, especially many women, can face. And I'm wondering, going through that, what strength did you pull from during those times, maybe of doubt, like you said early on, where you were overwhelmed and feeling like you had to maintain the direction? What resources did you utilize at that time?
I think I guess I'm not a quitter, but I really felt like we had something valuable. And I also, as much as I would have loved to have been the type of person to just hand it off to somebody else, I think because so much of my history and my husband's legacy and my kids' future was invested in this business. And also the people who worked for me. I will tell you that when in 2009, when I came in, when the recession was happening, I knew that I couldn't do this by myself. And I made sure that everybody in my firm was well compensated so that they would stay. And I think, I'm not saying anything that they're not aware of, but I think I just had a real determination. And also, I think my husband was really an incredible business person. And I did learn a lot from him. And I learned how to sort of, how to associate with the people in the firm. He was a big believer that you appreciate the things that people do and that you compensate them well. And I think that attitude is what I brought into it. But I can't answer you what was it inside of me that made me do it. But I think it was just, maybe it was fear, and maybe it was also my own sense of wanting to have control over what was my past and what was going to be my future. And I would love it. I would have loved to have been the type of person that maybe could have just said, okay, you handle it. But I don't think that would have worked for me.
Well, it sounds like you also use the resource of advisors and a support network, and even probably a challenge network to really guide you to learn and discover, more of the decisions that would add value to, you taking this new role, which I think is something that from all the conversations that we've had is really highlighting how much that network can be meaningful in these transformation times.
Well, that's one of the things that I think that's also really important for people who are starting business, not just for me, is to surround yourself with good professionals. I could not have done it without having, again, I joke that I don't even have to pick up the phone to speak to Mark Motel and Andrea Kotika, who were in your office. I couldn't survive my business without their support. Even though sometimes I think, oh my God, their fees, but that's beside the point. And then, having attorneys and you do need outside people to talk to, because also, even if you have a company and you trust the people, sometimes you need an outsider's perspective to help you sort of get a clear vision. So I relied on that a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into Valerie, something you had talked about, to kind of frame this whole network that we create for ourselves was really how mentors, whether known at the time or not, helped you kind of guide you through the transition that you experienced. And I found that very, valuable when we spoke last. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little more about your story.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, as all of the other panelists have stated, thank you so much, Heather, Chelsea, Tanisha, for this invitation to be a part of this wonderful panel today. So yeah, I think, Chelsea, to answer your question regarding mentors, as Heather mentioned, after finishing up at Columbia, started on the street, was in software technology, managing large-scale teams of men globally. The firm decided it was going to go public, and as a result, this meant that their various, at the time, affirmative action reports and the likes that revealed the number of women and minorities were going to be made public. And we did not have a great story to tell and wanted to do something about it. So I got the tap on the shoulder to, as I would say, I felt at the time I was being asked, but as time went on, and it didn't take much time for me to realize I was being voluntold that the firm needed me to start a global workforce, a little bit of supplier diversity, but mainly global workforce diversity initiative for the technology division. And the firm was very siloed. I think we had all of 900 employees at the time, very small partnership prior to becoming public. And so there were others who focused on their various divisions. And as Heather mentioned, my mind did say no, because imagine by now, I'd started in '87, I'd been there 10 years. And during that 10 years, to accomplish the climb that I did up the ladder, you can imagine, the challenges, the obstacles that I encountered. It was not easy. A lot of people like me did not survive, and a lot of people that weren't like me did not survive. Often I think it had not survival at the firm, as we called it, had nothing to do with race or gender. It had to do with your DNA, your tenacity, your grit, and your determination to to never drown. But anyway, realizing this was a position, the diversity position, which was no longer a line position. I was going to be in considered staff, admin, like all the things So my mentor said, well, let's negotiate. So a little bit like Helen talked about when she talked about risk appetite for women when they think about money and the whole notion of borrowing. It's something we typically don't look forward to doing. Whereas I think men, on the other hand, it's par for the course. It's like they would only use someone else's money if they could, right? So in my case, I didn't feel I had any leveraging or negotiating power relative to this new assignment. And my mentor, all of my mentors were white males. All of my colleagues were white males. I was the only woman at the time and minority in technology. There just weren't any other people like me there. But after 10 years, you just fit in and you don't really think about that so much because everybody's equally smart, talented, and we just get the job done. Then, you know, I had to prove myself a few times, to say the least, but I had gotten there. So I didn't want to move. I did not want to take on this new task, but my mentor said, let's think about what would make you happy. Let's go in with the list of concessions. What do you want to be successful if you were to do this? And I didn't know how to answer that because I'd never negotiated, you know, like that for my career. And so he taught me how to think about, well, you know, things that they, males, right, talk about all the time. Think of the length of time you'd like to be in this role, or that you would want to be in the role in order for you to have successes, but it doesn't have to be like a lifetime position. How long do you think it would take you to make a mark? And by the way, Valerie, he said, the reason why you've been tapped is because firm thinks you're the only one that can execute on this brilliantly. So, so keep that in mind as well. Like you are, you know, you're being asked to do this for a reason. So I thought, okay, that's a good point. And then he also asked, and what do you want to do when you finish this role? Do you want to come back to your same job, or would you like another assignment? I'm thinking, oh, this could get fun. And do you want to be based in the US? You know, because he heard me talk about it. He's my mentor. So we meet frequently. We talk about career life. And he knew I loved London. And he thought, well, maybe we could even find something for you to do in London if you want to, you know, if your family could arrange that sort of long distance move. And I thought, oh, now this is really starting to sound interesting. So I too then went back and thought about some things that I felt would help me be successful. And they included, because I knew nothing about diversity. Keep in mind, at the time, it was the late 90s, a little bit of the dot-com boom was happening, a lot of importing of STEM talent. And I just know this because I was in technology. And a little bit like now, there was this like major demand for technologists, and the supply was just not there. So we were looking at other countries and importing technologists at the time. And I thought, well, one of the things that I really need is education. I knew nothing about diversity. Firms like IBM and Xerox and GE, the Fortune 5s, the Fortune 1s, they made major inroads in the space, you know, years ago. But we were a small partnership. Everybody looked alike. Why would Goldman need diversity when everybody was ultra wealthy, looked the same? Well, you know, all from the Ivies, and they were successful. I mean, it made sense, right? Why do you fix something that's not broken? So, but now, you know, it's a new day. We're going to be revealed in terms of our workforce composite. And so I thought, well, one of the things that I want is top-notch training. If I'm going to do this, I need to be educated alongside of the best and the brightest. And there were people like Ted Childs from IBM, Barry Rand from Xerox. I knew the names because I was quickly starting to get up to speed on who was doing this well in corporate America. I knew David Thomas, who's now the president of Morehouse College. At the time, David was a professor at Harvard and considered kind of like the godfather of mentoring programs for minorities. So I wanted budget to fly to Harvard, to sit in David's face for one-on-one coaching. It was fabulous, right? We rolled out one of the most successful minority VP mentoring programs that Goldman Sachs has ever had. I also wanted permission to use the art in our corporate art collection to curate diversity exhibitions that focused on the different ethnic groups, special interest groups that the firm wanted me to recruit more of. So that was an ask. And so the bottom line was I had my list, they had theirs. We both agreed on, what we could and couldn't do. And most of the things I asked for, I was granted permission. And the life-changing ask, as most of you know, was the one to work with the curator of Goldman's. I think we had a 5,000 piece collection to curate the corporate diversity art exhibitions in all of the buildings in Lower Manhattan. And that, by the way, is what made me realize that was my next calling in terms of career. So I'm going to stop there, Chelsea, and make sure I've answered your question and let you get another one in if you have one.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we had spoken previously, I think what resonated the most to me is how you took control of what you were being voluntold to do. And, really reframe that to be a stretch assignment that you could find a way to be successful in. And, shaping that as you put it, like you were the only one who was up to the task and could complete it in the way that you had. And, from the success stories you've brought up previously, obviously you did very well in that career and have expanded on that. So I think just highlighting how reframing an ask can be in a position to shift and adjust, and how negotiating what that would look like to you is something I just wanted to really ensure that the audience got to hear from you, because I think everybody here has been voluntold to do something, and probably like your initial reaction, hands up, I don't want any part of it, whether or not really diving in and delving into how the possibilities could be open to you based on that ask.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we often also, we just do it and don't really have any requirements or ask of our own. And, in that case, you may be disgruntled, you may be bitter, you may be like dreading the position. But what my mentor taught me was to find a way to create some, negotiating points that will make you look forward to this role, that will make you, succeed even in a way that the partners could never even imagine, especially with the art piece, because they didn't know that was my side hustle. And that's what I did. Like every minute I wasn't at Goldman Sachs, they had no idea. And so just the diversity of thought around the concept made it exponentially more successful, because they had their ideas, they allowed me to bring mine, we put them all in the in the plan, and execution was phenomenal.
Yeah. I think a common thread that is woven between all the stories that you shared is, the value of embracing change and being knowledgeable about the risks that you're taking, and, what the values you hold are. And I think, for a lot of people, that's maybe one of the harder things to discover about themselves, is what are the values that they're trying to reach. And I think all the resources that you have all talked about and finding that for yourselves, sheds interesting light onto how others can embrace that same change. In the climate we are now, where we have the Great Resignation, and people are really taking a shift to look at those values and what work and life and that balance between it looks like, I'm wondering if you see, any differences from the times that you were going through transitions to now, or how just in line they are, and just your thoughts on that kind of to the group. I know, Helen, we were talking about, some of the similarities between what we're seeing now and when you were making the shift, how they're not really all that different, for especially say we're women in a career shift, about doing that, at a former time in your career versus now, we're seeing these same obstacles.
I can answer that, because I've given a lot of thought to that, especially having a husband who dies at a very young age. And, it's like you this is coming from the older side, but I'm sure for younger people, you work your whole life then to be able to enjoy it, and then that's cut short. So how do you live a life so that you can enjoy it while you're living it, and not wait till that mythical day that your ship comes in or you think you can do it? So in my case, a few things. One, I made a commitment to myself that if I wanted to travel, I would travel. Or if I wanted to do something, I would do it and not, put it off for another day or another year. So, and then the second part, which I think is a little bit more relating to my business, is I was very clear on how I wanted to run my business. I think business has its own level of stress, but I had to have good relationships with the people in my office and who I do business with outside. And so to some degree, there was a mindset of, call it kindness and thoughtfulness as to how I would want to run my business. And if I had to be nasty or, overly aggressive, that was not part of the mindset as to how I would want to run the business. So I think, though, if I'm answering your question, but I think it was very clear that, and I think with people wanting to leave or make changes, it's probably because they're not being personally gratified or haven't been able to structure a way of working that can balance. And I think particularly for women, where you can balance being a mother and working and then having a life outside. I joke, and it's not really a joke, but life is a full-time job. So how do you, sort of combine all those things? And, I do think, and I think we're three women who were talking from positions of, call it good fortune or having access to resources. But I think that's a very hard thing to sort of all put together and to make it work. But I do think that one has to have their own sense of, call it the inner core, as to how you want to live your life, both in business and how you want to use your free time.
Mm-hmm. In my work with clients, I do a values exercise, and then, asking people, I have cards to identify the top 4 values, and then looking at spending and trying to see how much is correlated. Of course, not everything is correlated, but to your question, Chelsea, even before COVID, it's important to recognize that life is not going to be what we imagined. I go to school for 20 years, I work for 40 years, and then I retire for 20 or 30. That life is constantly evolving, values are constantly changing, and to be open to that evolution and to be open to the questioning of, what was important to me in my 20s is not what's important to me now. And to be blessed with the privilege to make the choice, but everyone, money, finances, time, energy, they're finite resources. And we're always making choices as to where we want to allocate those 3 finite resources.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, early on in their careers lock their GPS onto a single location, which can sometimes give you the right directions, but the wrong destination. To all your points, it might not end up in a place where you find value or success. And Valerie, we talked about you being, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Apologies. I was just going to elaborate on, you talking about being voluntold for the position and decided to negotiate further your passion as part of that role. And just how did you discover that passion in general? Talking about living our lives to the extent we can.
Yeah, so I think early is a great question. I get it all the time. Like, how did art marry technology, marry investment banking, Early on the street, as an associate, I came in, typically, investment banks back then had 3 levels. analysts, associates, VPs, and then the partners, but they were not really discussed because there was a whole nother path to that level. So I came in as an associate. I was at a B school. And one of the things we all did was go through orientation programs. And you were taught that you had to have hobbies that would make for a good cocktail party conversation when entertaining clients. And even though, they called it, I think, the back office then. Anybody that wasn't on the in a revenue generating role. So if you were a lawyer, compliance, risk, anything that wasn't making money, you were back office. But we too needed training. So one of the hobbies that you could pick, of course, golf, bridge, was art collecting. And I thought, if I must, why not art? And I was naturally drawn to art about my own culture, about the African-American culture. One of the reasons is because growing up in America in the 60s, you do not learn anything about yourself. It just is not taught in our history books or in our art classes. So you are educated as though you didn't contribute anything, as though your culture didn't contribute anything. I think the country has made a lot of positive strides at correcting that, but we still have a long way to go. And so what I was naturally drawn to when I would visit the Met and MoMA and were the artwork and the artists that looked like me and that were reflective of my culture. And I'm talking like in a big way. I became extremely passionate about the dialogue these artists were having on the canvases of their paintings, because what it showed me for the first time was that we too, as African Americans, sing America and have a connected culture, even though I go to lunch every day with people that are from wonderful cultures that talk about their cultures all the time. I'm Irish American, I'm Jewish, I'm Russian. There was never anyone to talk to me about my culture. So there was a void, and the art fulfilled it. And it's funny, I remember never leaving work during lunch. Well, guess what? I find it nothing but 60 minutes to get on the subway. And if I heard there was a show in Soho with works by an African-American artist, I became so just passionate about the history, the art history lessons I was learning about the cultures of different artists who were from Texas and Arkansas and Arizona. Like, how do they have the same customs and traditions that I have? But that education was kept from us. And so I was putting it together in a way that made me realize all of those wonderful uptick positions and living in London, I had another calling. I wanted to package up everything I was learning and start educating Fortune 5s about the African-American culture, using their art collections as a vehicle. And that, broadened to other cultures and special interest groups as well, LGBT, because it was aligned with the diversity, helping corporate understand differences. But wow, what a wonderful way to accomplish that, using art as a vehicle. And 20 years later, I'm still doing it today. And what's fascinating is I'm doing it with the art collections of HBCUs. For those that don't know, that stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. People still don't know. They were started in the 1800s in this country, and there are 107 of them with fabulous art collections. So this Friday, I'm down at Art Basel, and I will give the very first HBCU art collection tour of the only art HBCU in South Florida, and that's Florida Memorial University. And I'm very proud of that. I am very proud of that. So
yeah, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's, how you described it, that you listened to your passion and expanded on that. I think, Laura, you spoke a little bit about that when you mentioned that you had opportunities to go back to different firms, when you had left your job and your husband had said not to stunt your creativity. And, talking about our work-life balance and what we're facing now in the market, how do you think employers will have to change to attract, top talent, given this great resignation and all these changes in the workforce?
Well, it's interesting, Chelsea. We're already seeing it on Wall Street. I don't know how many of you have followed the disgruntled Goldman Sachs analysts who, when you're first new on the street, you're working horrible hours. You're doing all the scut work. And to a certain extent, that's expected, right? Because if you want to earn a lot of money, then you have to, when you're at the bottom of the ladder, you're the one that's doing this work. And there was actually a PowerPoint that was put together by disgruntled employees. I think it was over the summer. And Wall Street's quite reluctant to respond to it. I think the response to employees was, here's more money. And so then, you yourself, if you're the analyst, has to say, that's not what's important to me. A work-life balance is important to me. And that's not going to be true for everybody. I also just recently read a story about an investment banker at Goldman, a woman of color with young children who's been commuting to her job at an investment bank from New Jersey, horrible hours. And she discovered that there's another alternative during the COVID stay-at-home time. It's like, wow, I can actually spend time with my children. She is now doing hybrid work, so she's commuting 3 days a week. It pains me even to hear that, but clearly I hope she feels like she loves her job, and that's why she's willing to do the hour and a half each way into Manhattan. But I do think, as we've been talking about, that during the time when the stay-at-home orders were in place, people discovered that there's another way, that there's another life, that you can have time to maybe make a meal and eat at home and do the work you do. And it's clearly, it is impacting the workplace. Some industries are more open to it than others, but it's back to Valerie's story. Are you willing to ask for what you need? I mean, it's very frightening to ask for something when you just hear that voice in your head. I remember when I told that story that I was going to go in and no longer be a victim and make some recommendations for it. My husband told me, don't do that. Don't do that. You'll be rocking the boat. So it's scary, but you need to hear the voice inside your head louder than the story that you imagined, and ask for what you need.
So it falls in some ways on employees or the staff of companies to ask for the changes that they need in place in order for the employers to really identify and adjust to potentially what that means to attract the top talent and maintain them at their firms. It sounds like you're saying.
Yes, and fortunately, there seems to be more competition for employees, so that, again, as Valerie talked about, whether or not she felt she had the leverage to ask. But for example, people who used to go to Wall Street, again, with this idea of making money, well, the technology industry has taken a lot of those employees, because there's also the ability to earn, a nice living and not have to work those horrible hours. So there is more competition, which puts more leverage in the hands of the employees to negotiate.
Helen, you mentioned that as part of your strategy, when you stepped in the leadership role, was to compensate fairly to keep the resources at the firm happy so that they didn't leave. We had a question that came in on the Q&A about negotiating salary and what your recommendation would be to someone that doesn't feel they are a value to the firm and they're looking for a higher amount than they were originally, slotted or negotiated as. So do you have any advice on how they shouldn't step in and negotiate?
I know what the people who work for me do, and they usually put together a sheet of all the things that they've been able to accomplish in the given year. And I think one has to look at, again, are you on the money-making side of the business or on the organizational support side of the business? But even that has value. So my recommendation is that that person put together their own sort of resume of what they've accomplished and what they think that where they've added value to the company. And then, I think that sometimes you have to push back a little bit more, and no isn't no the first time. And I also think if they are, it also depends upon the structure of the company. But I think if whoever is doing the compensation wants to keep them, and if there are no, sort of underlying issues in the company as far as financial issues, because sometimes employees don't really know what's going on with the sort of call it the financial wherewithal of the company at the time, or what their cash flow, how their cash flow is working. But I think either you can ask for it in compensation, or there are other things that you can ask for in compensation, maybe a little bit more time off, or, or I'd say those are probably the two things: time off, or, more money, or, say, I want to revisit this in 6 months. But also to really, I think as an employee, it's also important to understand where is the corporation or the company, what's their picture. And it's not that the owner or that person will be completely open, but I think it is a two-way conversation.
Valerie, I don't know if you want to weigh in too, since we were talking about the negotiations that you kind of went through in your career.
Yeah, I think that, and I've looked at that question in the chat. I think what's significant is the question states that the salary and bonuses have already been determined, and they want to know what, if anything, they can negotiate at this point. There might not be much, because there's generally a budget pool that is given to, senior leadership early on, well before the amounts are actually communicated. And there's a finite pool of funds, as you all imagine. And so when you do have an opportunity to get in front of it, is for the next year, right? During this year's discussion. Hey, thank you for communicating, my salary increase and my bonus. I do, however, feel I am contributing a tremendous amount, and hopefully the person's performance appraisal confirm that. What is it that I can start doing right now to prepare myself for that next promotion, for the next, opportunity to be in a assignment that might be a stretch assignment that will certainly get me in a salary range that's greater than the one I am now, that will make me eligible for larger bonuses, because right now you'll have 4 quarters to work on that plan, and then you stay in that person's tactfully face to make sure you're on track for that next role. Now, a couple of things have to be in play. There has to be an opportunity, but if you're valuable to the firm and they want to keep you, they're going to make something happen, especially in today's market, because there's a supply of talent out there. So advice is work on that, ask for your raise and your promotion and your stretch assignment every day. Don't wait until the day before you're going to get the news, because it's too late at that point, more than likely, to influence it.
Yeah, I think, a combination of both what you, Valerie and Helen, what you said is, looking forward to the next year, say to the next opportunity to ask for that raise, promotion, bonus, whatever it may be, and take the information that you may have been doing through that whole year. Don't wait to look back. What did I do last October or whatever it may be, and start, pulling together all those points of reference that you can really use to bolster your, support for why you deserve all of what you're asking for, and that it's not unwarranted. I think that goes a long way. Laura, have you dealt with this in your career, dealing with people in, finance, kind of being timid and asking for their wants in a financial outlet in their careers?
I mean, I'm actually smiling to myself. Maybe this is why when I worked on Wall Street, I chose the path that I did. But my compensation, if you will, certainly by the end of my career was pretty objective. I had like an interest in the overall pool. I worked for hedge funds that have generally, hedge funds at this point are mostly defined by how they how the compensation works, which is there would be a management fee for the percentage of assets under management, but then we would keep a percentage of the earnings. So if you had a billion-dollar firm that earned 10% on the money, there'd be that 10% sitting there, and I had a defined percentage of that pool. So I never really, it wasn't given that I had an actual profit and loss statement. I sort of knew what I'd be earning. It was very straightforward. It wasn't a qualitative, she smiled a lot or she was really helpful or which I liked. I think when I had roles which were much more, where, as Valerie described it, somebody's determining on the basis of some things that are measurable, but some things that are not as measurable, that's harder. Because someone could just sort of not like your manner. I did find as a woman on Wall Street, I was quite emotional. I thought in a positive way. If I saw a good investment, I was emotional about it. Like we have to do this now, and that wasn't always well received. So if I didn't have the ability to say, out of this pool, this is how much I've contributed, it might not have gone as well. So I enjoyed having my own profit and loss statement.
One thing I also want to touch on, we talked about a little bit, but now that we're in largely a work environment, and a lot of people are maybe in this transition period or in a rebranding, about how they can do that in the environment we in. How can they put themselves in the face of others, whether they're new employers or new teams? What would add value to them facing these new obstacles? Valerie, maybe you can.
So I'm sorry, rephrase the question.
So now, when we're in this virtual environment, a lot of people are in a transition where they're working with new teams or new employers. Maybe they're rebranding themselves for a new position. When you're not in everybody's physical space, do you have any advice of how they could do that in our virtual environments?
Yeah, so it's a little, I feel like I have an advantage regarding the whole notion of working virtually, because when I left Goldman in 2002, I left to work from home, and I've been working virtually for the past 20 years. And so this is so natural feeling for me. And especially as a technologist, like we really don't ever need to see anybody that we work with, because technology connects us like exactly the way we're being connected now. So what I would suggest is they think of scheduling meetings the same way they would live, like this. When I was in corporate, we had weekly one-on-one meetings with our managers. It was required. And we also had career development coaches that the firm invested in for all of its employees. And so a part of the coaching was you have to take responsibility for your own career. And you had a career development plan, and you talked about it to a greater or lesser extent based on how aggressive you were about your career. So my advice would be talk about your career. First of all, put one together. It's like the entrepreneurs and the business plans. We know we all need them, but where are they? When's the last time we've updated the business plan? For people in corporate, your career development plan is so critical, because it allows you to figure out what you want to do next. And if you don't know, you can't articulate it, and then you leave it to happenstance. So I would, Chelsea, book virtual one-on-ones or whatever your corporate culture allows in terms of your management, your time with your manager, and let it be known what you want to do for your career, even though the meeting may be primarily to talk about your deliverables and your clients and what's behind and what's in trouble. Set aside 5 to 10 minutes to talk about you, because you need to plant seeds, especially women. Women aren't always thought of as being partner or as making VP early. But if you let them know, hey, my expectation is, and I know I'm bringing this up a little early, bring it up early. Because if they hear it enough, they'll start seeing you with a partner like label, like, oh boy, here she comes. And as I would tell us, dress and act, dress for the job you want, not for the one you have. If you want to be a partner, want to be presidential, start walking it. And you can do that virtually, right on the Zoom call, with your background, with your presence, with your tone. And so that's the advice I would give. Don't think of it any differently, and it's easier. It's easier, right? Because you could show up on camera and there'll probably be a lot more available because it's so much easier now to meet with people. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that came across would be, I'll open this up to the group. What advice would you have for someone that might not be ready to complete a transition in their career path, to find more happiness or fulfillment than what they are in their career?
I think those decisions take a long time. I don't think anybody makes a change out of one position to another, like overnight. So to some degree, I would say to that person, allow yourself the time to let your decision percolate, and you will know when the time is right. And not, it may be that they're in an okay place, but not really where they want to be, but allow them the luxury or the acceptance that they're not there yet. And knowing that they are in the process of thinking about it. And I think it's sometimes an internal process, but I also think it's good to have, I think in many ways in business, it's good to externalize and discuss with other people, because then you begin to hear what you're saying and the reflection back of what you say to other people. So that would be my thought on that one.
And I would just add to that, I love that Helen talked about talking to others. What I found so powerful since I left Wall Street, because I had young kids and I really wasn't making the time to network, but not network, like, meet people for breakfast, meet people for drinks after work, have conversations. I wasn't working at doing that because I wanted to get home. And now it is my life. A lot of it is virtual, but I've met so many interesting people and really gravitated towards groups of women who share my interests, and, have really larger and larger groups of people that I know well. So if you are starting to imagine that you'd like some transition to new work in your life, reach out to people, just have conversations without any date of when any actual change will take place. And it ends up being magical, I have to say, in my own life, things that then appear and come to you just from relationships that you're interested in, that you're pulled to have, not pushing yourself to have. So I would encourage, open up to more people and have conversations.
And I think it's for people that are fine where they are, because I thought I might have heard that a little bit too. They're not ready to transition. One of the most surprising discoveries I remember having when we created what we thought was the absolute best mentoring program for VPs at Goldman. And there were probably, between the Hispanic and African Americans, I remember there being 50 people, and we needed 50 partners. And there may have been 100, but the point is, it was a voluntary mentoring program, and a lot of the candidates did not want to participate. I was blown away. I thought everybody was going to die for an opportunity to be mentored by a partner. But their mindset was like, look, I'm almost, 40, 50 now. I've not been given stretch assignments until now. My kids are going to college. I'm older. I'm okay where I've come to terms with the fact that I've been passed over, not promoted. Everybody's making decent money. But there's always a little more you could have made had you been mentored. And so there's a certain portion of the population that are fine where they are. And it doesn't mean they're complacent or, not ambitious. They're solid in their careers. They have a lot of other things going on in life, children responsibilities or whatever, elder care. And so anything, that would be dramatic in terms of, a brand new position, lots of travel, long hours all over again, isn't that attractive mid-career often, depending on what your lifestyle is. So if that was also a part of that question, hopefully that it's helpful to know that, there are people that are fine where they are.
Thank you.
Yeah, Valerie, I want to thank you. I think that was a very honest answer. I think you and Helen and Laura sharing your stories, hopefully everyone on this call has found this discussion helpful, whether they're going through a current transformation or not, like you mentioned. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I think today was a wonderful conversation, some, pain points that I think are important to share because it helps other people see that, they're not the only ones that are going through difficult journeys at times. So thank you everyone for joining. Stay well, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.